But your rise to fame didn't come early in life or easy, did it?
No, it all started. Well, I've always had a band, I've always had a band since I was 17. And the reason I had a band is when you lived in Liverpool as a teenager, the best way to pull a girl was you either to have a band, play an instrument, or sing, or be able to dance. And so I wasn't taking any chances. I could do the four. I had my own band, played the banjo, sang, and I could dance. I was a pretty good dancer, So, yeah, that's when it all started.
You are one of the few performers that is able to take the genre of comedy into film. There aren't many stand-up comedians that are able to do that. What do you think your skill was, or is it just luck, really?
No, it's not luck. It's just that I'm a ham. I love the business. I love meeting the stars, and it's quite nice because although Samuel Jackson was absolutely fabulous, he was lovely to work with. I wouldn't swap places with him for a minute because he can't go anywhere on his own. He has a wardrobe person and someone to do his hair and someone to do his makeup and a PA and a bodyguard. I don't want that. That's why I stay in Liverpool. People think they can't understand why I still live in Liverpool. And I say, well, why would I want to go to London? Why would I want to go anywhere? I live in Liverpool, my family's in Liverpool, my friends are in Liverpool, the local pubs I've always drank in all my life are in Liverpool. So no, I've got no intentions of leaving.
You are approachable, and I think that's one of the reasons for your success. You come across as very genuine, and you call a spade, and you'll tell the truth. A lot of people don't do that. Whether it's because their PRs won't allow them to do that, I don't know. But have you always made an effort and continued to be straight down the line?
Yeah, and that's what I say. The book is brought to know. I didn't want to do the book. I mean, let's get that out the way. I don't particularly want to wash my dirty washing in public. But we were approached by someone who said, they'd like to do the book, and I said, I'm not interested. And they said, well, we'll do an unauthorised one. And so I wasn't having that. So I said to Rita, look, I'm going to do this book, but if I do, it's warts and all. And, there's going to be stuff in it that you don't know about. I didn't really want to tell you. It's because we've all done things in our lives of which we're ashamed. But anyway, when we decided to write it, it took us a long time. It was soul-searching, but, there's the end product there on the table.
Are you really happy with it?
Yeah, I am. I mean, but because obviously you can only put so much in. There's like 64 years worth of stuff, but you couldn't put that into a book. It'd look like the Doomsday Book. So we've took out. I obviously had to leave bits out, but that's like a nice abridged version of Ricky Tomo's life.
When you go through your life with such a fine tooth comb like that, I mean, was it therapy for you, or was it upsetting? Did it bring back bad memories, or did it make you realise what an incredible success you have now? And did you look at it positively?
I suppose in a way it was therapy. I seem to have a better long-term memory than I do have a short-term memory. And I've done tons of things in my life I wish I hadn't done, and said things I wish I hadn't said, and hurt people, me fight with Bernard Hill, and, me falling out with my ex-wife and stuff like, if you could turn the clock back, you would probably, I don't know, if not alter them, probably temper them, and, but no, it's there for everyone to see, and as I say in the book, I'm probably going to get some stick from some people, but so be it.
We're going to find out all about your life throughout the programme. We're also going to play some music from artists from Liverpool. You're actually born in Blackpool, but you were brought up in Liverpool. And we're going to find out about your childhood. Let's play a piece of music to get into the programme. And there are so many artists that we could play. I wanted to start with something by the Beatles. Although in the autobiography you said you never actually saw them live. And there were better bands in Liverpool at that time, weren't there?
I think so. I mean, the Beatles were doing the club scene, the rock and roll thing and all the young girls and all that. I was playing around about the same time with them, with my little band, but I was doing the working men's clubs, the social scene, and I'm still very much into that old time music hall. I mean, as talented as they were, and they were talented. I mean, I did actually know Ringo Starr, and there's a story in the book about when Ringo got in trouble in Butlins and there was going to be a big fight with the Scotch lads. He called on us for our assistance, but he was then with a band called Rory Storm and the Hurricanes, who, in my opinion, were equally as good as the Beatles. And there was Ian and the Zodiacs, Terry and the Seniors, the Big Three, the Remo Four. There was a million bands in Liverpool at the time, and they were all great. I just think the Beatles were sharper than them. I think they were better organised, far, far more intelligent, and they got the big breaks. They went and got Brian Epstein, and the rest is history.
You also talk in the book about how some members had the blessed upbringing of money, and some were born with a silver spoon in their mouth. So in some senses, they were given an advantage because they could afford better stuff, presumably, and get better opportunities.
Yeah, I mean, and I'm not having a go at the Beatles here, by the way. I mean, how can you knock the Beatles blinking out? They've wrote some incredible stuff. But as far as I'm concerned, apart from like John and Paul were definitely middle class, and they went to the Institute or whatever it was, the College of Art, and they mixed in that circle, you know, which was totally different from the likes of myself, who was working on serving his time as an apprentice plasterer, would come home covered in plaster and stuff like that, you know, to a 2-up, 2-down terraced house. They didn't have any of that, but good luck to them. Good luck to them. But this is what I'm talking about in the difference, you know. As far as I'm concerned, I think they were middle class to me from the background I came from.
What exactly are you?
I'm a Scouser, lad. I'm a Scouser, so that means if a job comes up, you go and do it. So, I mean, as I've said this before, you know, and it's common knowledge, if the acting finished tomorrow, I would not shed a single tear. It's been great to me. I've loved it. I am a ham. I don't make any pretense about that. I still get starstruck. I love meeting big names and big personalities. I love going to work. But if it finished tomorrow, then I'll do something else. You know, maybe I'll make another record, or maybe I'll write another book, or maybe I'll go on tour with my little band. And yet, because it's difficult to go on tour with my band, because no one can pronounce the name. Because the band is called, are you ready for this?
Go on.
Colonel Bogey's Ex-Servicemen's Military Musical Ensemble. Where did you get? And do you know what it's based on? When I was a kid, my mum and dad used to take us to the cinema, and then later on to the theatre of a Saturday night. There used to be all these ex-servicemen who'd be standing there playing trumpets and banjos, and they'd have half a leg missing, and they'd have half a military uniform on, and they fascinated me. They were real, genuine buskers who were like, you know, they were the result of the war, you know, they were the casualties of the war, and they fascinated me, and I always used to think as a kid, I'd love to be in a band like that. And I've actually got my own band like that, and we go on stage in military gear, you know, and yeah.
You've had some great names through your career. Hobo Rick and the City Slickers was one of the early ones, wasn't it?
That was one of my first bands. My very first band was called the Gitanjos, because there was 2 guitars and 2 banjos. But then the second one was Hobo Rick and the City Slickers, and that ran for years, and it was very, very good. And we had a lot of fun and a lot of times, and we were actually nominated for the best club act of the year, and you know, when we were kids, and it was great. But it's all been about having a good time and enjoying ourselves.
Let's find out now about how you started and what your childhood was like. As I said earlier, you were born in Blackpool, moved 3 days later, I think, didn't you, to Liverpool? But it wasn't an easy upbringing in the sense that you weren't overwhelmed with money, but presumably the love was there, and that's all that mattered.
Yeah, my mum was evacuated. I was born on the 26th of September, 1939. The war had started on the 3rd of September. Liverpool was a seaport, so it was an obvious target for the Luftwaffe. So my mum, who was like 9 months pregnant with me, was moved to Blackpool, to Bispam. When I was 3 days old, she came back to Liverpool. And, I mean, one of the running things between me and Cilla Black is she says, I'm not a proper Scouser because I didn't spend the first 3 days of my life in Liverpool. And I say, I'm a better Scouser than her because she hasn't spent the last 40 years of her life in Liverpool. And so, but that's it, yeah, she was evacuated during the war.
They made a lot of that in the papers, didn't they, that thing about you and Cilla?
Yeah, you know, I don't wish the girl any harm, but I mean, she, you know, as far as I'm concerned, I don't know anyone in Liverpool who's met her. I mean, I met her mum, I worked with her mum on the markets. I used to have a stall on a Saturday market, not a proper stall, by the way, out on the pavement, scraping for a few bob. I used to travel to Stoke, buy cups and saucers on a Friday night, and then stay up all night, and get to the market about 5-6 o'clock in the morning to Great Ormond Street, put a decorator's table up and sell the stuff. I'd make a few quid. And her man would be 10 feet away from me with a blanket on the ground with bits and pieces of old clothes. So I knew her man well. But I knew her dad even better because her dad, many a time, sat next to me in the pub called the Halfway House in Scotland Road, where I sat and played the banjo, Jimmy Ennis played the guitar, Johnny Jones played the guitar, and we'd have a sing-song in this incredible pub. And he was called a black and white minstrel because he was Johnny White and his daughter was Cilla Black. So, I mean, she comes from good stock. It just gets up my nose a bit when they go on about how much they love Liverpool, but you see little or nothing of them here, you know.
I think there's you and Doddy left, isn't there, really?
Doddy, yeah, he's a good friend of mine. Doddy was at my wedding. Doddy was at the wedding. I got married in January of this year. I haven't been married before, but I was married for 24 years. And then I've been divorced for 18 years. So I got married again this year, and Doddy was at the wedding, and Frank Carson, Stan Boardman, and Norman Collier, and all, you know, and people from Coronation Street, Liz Dawn and Faith Brown, Sue Johnson, all people from like the work I do, you know, from television and radio and comedy. But then in the evening time, at 7 o'clock, we moved to a working men's club, and we had another wedding. We had a different wedding with only mates from the building sites and the pubs and the clubs and the lads I'd grown up with. And it was great. So we had 2 weddings, really, and it was fabulous.
I spoke to Doddy yesterday doing a bit of research about you, and I said, have you ever come across this Ricky Tomlinson? And he speaks exceedingly high of you. And he'll call a spade, a bit like yourself. If he doesn't like it, he'll say it. And he said you were really straight down the line, and there was a lot of time for you. It must be nice for you to have that kind of compliment from someone like him.
Yeah, but Doddy's, as you say, Doddy's dead straight. I mean, politically, I suppose we're poles apart. But as a human being, he's a wonderful human being. And he does so much without people knowing, so much for charity, that people would be amazed if they knew the workload that the guy actually does. And 4 times a year he has these things called the Good Turn Society, which is mainly people from the club scene, old entertainers. And a guy came up with a remark at the last one I went to, and I thought it was fabulous. An old comic called Dougie Webb stood up and said, Ken, I've been reading in the paper that you've had a stalker chasing you for months and months and months. He said, I'm so sorry to hear about it. He said, I was so upset, in fact, he said, that I've done some research and I found out that the woman isn't a stalker. She's an ivory poacher. Isn't that lovely?
That's a great story. I suppose we better play a song by Doddy, really, because he's, as I say, the last bastion of music from Liverpool. He stayed there. He will not move from there. He still lives in the same house he was born in Notty Ash. Do you have a favourite of his?
I like Happiness. I just think it says everything. I think it says everything. And his show is even called The Happiness Show. I mean, if you've ever seen him on the theatre, it's unbelievable. And Sir John Mills, who I know quite well, the last time Sir John Mills came to Liverpool, we took him for a wonderful meal to a beautiful restaurant. I said, is there anything special you'd like to do, Sir John? And he said, yeah, I'd like to go and see Ken Dodd. So Doddy was only a few miles away over the water in New Brighton. So we took him backstage, and they'd met about 40 years previously, and they both remembered the exact time, date and place where they'd met. And I thought that was absolutely amazing. But he's a wonderful... I mean, as soon as he goes on the theatre, that's it, isn't it? And he doesn't do 40 minutes and can't wait to get off. He does 4.5 hours, and you've got to drag him off.
Now, earlier on, I mentioned about your childhood and the fact that you weren't blessed with incredible wealth. But you had a typical upbringing in a sense that you shared a bed with your brothers. I just wonder whether you look back now and think that you lost out on anything, the fact that you didn't have huge amounts of money.
No, I didn't know any different. We lived in an ordinary terraced house, 2 up, 2 down. And I mean, when I say a terraced house, the rooms were so small, they'd be like 12 foot by 12 foot, but that everyone was in the same boat. So you didn't know you were rich or you didn't know you were poor. You were just the same as everybody else. But looking with hindsight, which is a wonderful thing, is it? With hindsight, I realised that we really must have been sort of hard up, to say the least, because my dad was a full-time baker and he worked 27 years on nights. But my mum done 3 jobs. After us, there was 3 of us, like 3 brothers, and then a big gap of 9 years before my brother Ronnie was born. But as soon as the 3 of us were in school or the nursery, my mum used to go and scrub a pub, go and scrub private houses. She's worked in a laundry, she's worked in a tobacco factory. She's done everything. And it's only when you look back and you realise how hard that they worked. And that was just to give us like sort of home comforts, if you will, to keep a roof over our head and put clothes on our back. And but when I look back, little things were wonderful, because my dad didn't work very far away in the bakery, and he would slip out of the bakehouse about 6 or 7 o'clock in the morning and run home and light the fire, so that the old coal fire was burning when we came down, and he'd make a plate of toast and lovely little things like. But I loved him, And the first time I kissed a man was when he was dying in hospital, and I went in to see him, put my arms on him and kissed him, and I still get welled up when I talk about him, because he was only 55 when he died, and he'd worked all his life and he didn't leave nothing, because everything he had he gave to us 4 lads.
Those times during the war, there wasn't a lot to be optimistic about. I mean, the country was on its knees. There wasn't a lot of money around, and presumably there was no reason to be optimistic, because you couldn't see a way out. How did you keep the morale? I mean, how did you keep smiling during those times?
But I don't know. But even as a youngster, even as a 5 or 6 year old, because like I can remember the planes coming over, and people didn't take any chances. As soon as you heard an aeroplane coming, your mum would grab you. All the kids would either dive into the shelters which were built in the middle of the street, or they'd drag you in. If you were in the house, they would drag you and throw you under the stairs and dive on top of you. So you'd have 4 or 5, the 4 lads, or the 3 lads rather, and my mum on top of us under the stairs, which was probably the most dangerous place in the house, because if a bomb come down, the lot would fall on you. But I can still remember, as a tiny toddler, I can still remember people singing hymns and songs in them shelters during the Blitz. And I can remember my eldest brother coming back with bits I didn't understand then, because Albert's 2 years older than me, but he'd have shrapnel with him. He'd go collecting bits of shrapnel and stuff like that. So, we lived each day as it came, but so did every family in the street. And people, even though stuff was rationed and stuff like that, people were good, Someone would always give you, I don't know. I remember having to have coupons to go and get some sweets or a bar of toffee and stuff like that. Someone had always come across with a coupon so you could go and get sweets and stuff like that.
I know you were only a very young child during the war, but with a child's mind, did you ever think of it as being exciting, seeing the planes or finding the shrapnel, or did you fully understand the seriousness of what was going on around you?
No, I didn't understand. Also just knew that the planes were dangerous. And if you were playing out in the street, because in them days you could play in the street, because like from side to side of the street, probably no more than 20 foot, but if you had a plane, you knew you had to either get in the air raid shelter or run in the house, But as I say, people were just so wonderful. Neighbours, if you were in the street, so neighbours would grab you and take you into the air raid shelter and shout, "It's all right, Peg, he's in here," or whatever. Everyone knew everyone. And I know it's an old cliche now, but you did leave your doors open all the time, and you could just knock on someone's door and walk in, And when people say to me, "There's no more crime today than there was in them days," that's a load of twaddle. It's a load of twaddle. You could walk anywhere, anytime, day or night, and I've never heard of anyone getting attacked. And in all my youth growing up in Liverpool, and Liverpool's a pretty tough place, it's a seaport, we've got a mix of everyone. I can never ever remember ever an old age pensioner getting battered and punched and having their pension stolen or the ring dragged off her finger. I can never remember that, but it's commonplace now. It's on the television every week, and it's appalling.
There's a part of the book that I found very passionate when you talk about your mother in her last days, and basically she said that the world had changed and it was her time to go because she couldn't associate with the world anymore. It had gone so far the wrong way that she didn't feel that she needed to be there anymore.
Yeah, her expression was, we were sitting watching the telly and something could come on about one of these old pensioners getting battered in their old home, in their own home. Someone, I don't know what they'd gone and said they were from the water board or something, and she said to me, and she was 85 then, she died when she was 86, she said, "I am so glad I'm going out of this world now, Rick, and not coming into it." And I thought, what a terrible thing for it to be like that, She's worked all her life, she's been through that war, she's reared 4 lads, and she wasn't sorry to be leaving this world, And I thought, how sad.
Because Ricky went to prison for 2 years because of what he believed. He could have avoided that if he'd have only been willing to plead guilty for something he didn't do. There wouldn't even have been a fine. Now, I find that incredible to put yourself through that. You were in solitary confinement for part of it. What I'm curious to find out about, though, is when you began to have this self-belief and stick up for what you believe in and not back down under any circumstances.
Well, from the age of 17, the first time I was a shop steward, I was only 17 years of age, working on a site in Carrington. So I've always believed in sort of workers' rights. I come from a very sort of old-fashioned royalist family. You wouldn't believe that. They were working class, they had nothing. And my grandparents had less than us, and they were staunch conservatives. Staunch. The first time I seen my dad cry, in fact, it was the only time I seen him cry, was when the old king died. And I couldn't get my head around that, But we've always been passionate about rights for people. And so obviously I've been a shop steward umpteen times. But when the building site came about in 1972, I took part in this. I was a shop steward. I was one of the leaders of the North Wales Strike Action Committee, and we had a very, very successful campaign during that strike, which lasted between, 12 or 14 weeks. Well, it was an official strike, the one and only one the building industry's ever had. And it was so successful that 5 months after the strike was over, the bosses decided to teach us a lesson. And so the big building firms got together with the government and brought these charges. But when the police came to see me, they wanted me to be a prosecution witness, because my politics had been far different than some of the lads who were involved in the Strike Action Committee. And I said, well, no, how can I be a witness against them? I was one of them, and I was proud to be one of them. A, I wanted to know what was going on, and B, I wanted my say. And so they said, well, if you don't, we'll have to charge you, which they did. And I ended up getting 2 years. And my mate Desi got 3. And another lad called Mackenzie Jones, we got charged with conspiracy. This other lad, Mackenzie Jones, wasn't even at the meeting where the conspiracy was supposed to have taken place, and he got a year. But I'm glad to say he was able to go to an open prison and get in and out as quick as he can. Me and Desi decided to do it hard. We wouldn't wear clothes, we wouldn't work, we caused as much trouble as we could. And so obviously spent most of our time in solitary confinement when we wouldn't wear clothes. But it was during that time that the governor of Leicester was a man called Norman Hill, who had been an ex-bricklayer, who'd had to leave the building industry because of the arthritis and rheumatism in his hands. And he gave me this book. I'll never forget. He said, have you read this book? And he was a unique prison governor because he walked around the prison on his own. Normally they have a guard or two with them, in case anyone attacked him. This guy always walked around on his own. And he said, have you read this book, Tomo? And I said, what is it, Mr. Hill? He said, it's called The Ragged Trousered Philanthropist. And I said, no, I haven't. And he said, well, have a read of that. And he gave me this book. He didn't lend it me, he gave it me. And once I was into the first page, the hair on the back of my neck stuck up. It was amazing. It's an amazing book. And it obviously was one of the major factors in changing the direction in which the rest of my life would go. And by that time, I'd already started listening to classical music and radio because there's nothing else to do in solitary confinement, apart from doing a bit of writing on toilet paper. You got to write it, because I smuggled it all out, or most of it out later on. But that book has become so important to me, and people have read articles about it, that I've actually people have wrote to me and said, look, we can't get it here where we are. And I've sent them to China, I've sent them to America, Australia, New Zealand, I've sent them everywhere copies of this book, and it's a wonderful, honestly, it's a wonderful book, and I would recommend it. I would recommend it to anyone. But the time in solitary confinement, as I say, your politics change and your thoughts change, and as I say, I'd started doing a little bit of writing, realised how much I'd missed writing since I wanted to be one at the age of 13 and stuff like that. And it was just another experience, it was just another day in the life of Ricky Tomo.
Do you regret anything you did to end up there? I think you were made an example of from what I read in the book and what I've read previously. But would you still do the same again in terms of standing up for what you believe in?
Oh, yeah. Don't forget. When we were in court on the day the trial started, and this wasn't just an ordinary trial, by the way, although the authorities tried to say it was. I want some of your listeners to try and visualise this. We're at the court. There's hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of policemen outside. There's hundreds more inside the court buildings. There's policemen with Alsatian dogs. There's policemen on the roofs of buildings around the courthouse with video cameras. There's riot fellas in vans secreted round the building. And what for? There's 6 ordinary building workers from North Wales on trial. So we knew right from the start that something was going on. We didn't realise how bad it was going to be. But when we were actually in the cells, before the trial started, the barristers come in and said, there's a deal on offer here. If you plead guilty, you're going to get fined 50 quid. The union are going to pay the £50, and you'll walk out, you'll only be in court half an hour. And 4 of the lads said they wanted to take the deal. I said I wouldn't. I had no criminal past, I've got no police record, never been in trouble with the police, so I'm not taking the deal. And Desi Warren said he wouldn't take the deal. And to be fair to the other 4 lads, they said, well, if you 2 are not, we're not. So it ended up the 6 of us pleaded not guilty and went and stood trial. The trial lasted 55 days. I was in the witness box for 3 days. The judge was an absolute joke. We had some of the leading counsel in the country, John Platts-Mills, Keith McKyle, David Altaris, real big names like defending us. And we were prosecuted by a guy who's now the High Court judge called Morris Strait QC. But the trial was just a show trial.
There was an interesting moment in court when the jury found out a revelation, wasn't there?
See, the jury were out overnight and couldn't come to a unanimous verdict. And when they were told by a court usher that if they did find us guilty, that we were going to get fined 50 quid and the union were going to pay the £50, which was the same as we'd been told at the start of the trial. Two of them changed their mind, so they then had a majority verdict. When I got sentenced to 2 years, one of the jurymen jumped up, turned round and started having a go at another guy in the jury box, and actually left the jury box and went into the jury room. So they had to send for him and bring him back, because apparently, I don't know, the jury's got to be there till the judge finishes his sentencing. And then he gave Desi Warren the 3 years. And that's when we made our speeches from the dock, saying how the trial had been politically motivated, how we were pawns in the trial, and stuff like that. And so and so that really happened at the beginning of the end. That's when we went in and decided that we wanted to be reclassified as political prisoners. And the funny thing is, every time we were visited by what they call the visiting magistrates, all they wanted you to do was say you're sorry and they let you go. And of course I wouldn't say I was sorry ever. But they said, look, we don't have such a thing in England as political prisoners, so we can't classify you as one. But I remember getting interviewed by a priest, a Roman Catholic priest, for this parole board. And I'm not a Roman Catholic priest, but I've still obviously had a lot of respect for the man. And he said to me, you must understand, Rick, he said, you're a political prisoner. And we've got 7 in jail in England at the moment. Now, he was the only one who was up front. I've got an idea who a couple of the others would be. I think that the Price girls were in jail from Ireland at the time, the Price sisters. And I don't know who the others were at the time, but there was me and Desi, the Price sisters. Probably people like John Stonehouse or Carl Milhenge who've been involved in the Harold Wilson slag heap scandal and stuff like that. I think they, but I don't know who the others were, to be honest with you.
Did anything positive come from the time you spent by yourself in that cell? I mean, it must have just been the worst time ever. I can't imagine a worse thing to happen, knowing in your heart that you shouldn't have been there. Did you learn anything? Did anything positive come out of that?
Yeah, as I said, there's loads of positive things come out of it. I mean, I remember a fella coming up to me one day and he said, I just can't believe the sentence you've got, mate. He said, I can't believe it. He said, I'm so sorry for you. And he walked away. And I said to someone, I said, who's that? He said, oh, he's doing a double life sentence. This fella's doing double life. And he's telling me how sad it is, because he obviously had more nous than me, knowing I'd been set up by the system. But a lot of positives come out. I met some smashing people inside. I met people inside who shouldn't be inside. And that's what makes me quite angry when I read about Jeffrey Archer, who's now an authority on prison. Well, I challenge Jeffrey Archer to say, how do you know about prison, Jeffrey? You haven't been to prison. You've been to a holiday camp. Because all the time I was in prison, and I got moved about time and time into different prisons all over the place, Stafford, Shrewsbury, Leicester, London prisons, blah, blah. I never met anyone who got a job in a theatre like he did. I never met anyone who was allowed to wear their own suit like he did. I never met anyone who could go for lunch with prison officers to fancy restaurants like he did. He's never been to jail, and he's got the cheek to sit down and write prison diaries. And also, at the same time, reading the paper in one of the broadsheets the week before last about Ramsbottom, who's the Inspector of Prisons, actually made overtures to the prison authority to move Jonathan Aitken, when he was in jail, from one cushy open prison to an even cushier open prison near to where his son was at school in Eton. So you see, the class system is alive and well and thriving in Britain.
We've talked a lot about your life and things that have happened to you. We talked about prison just there, and now I want to talk to you about something that affected me. Whilst on holiday in Greece over the summer, I could only get the Daily Mail, and you were front page. And there was an article that was allegedly written by your ex-wife that said the most dreadful things about you, that you had more or less abandoned your children from your first wife, and all kinds of things that really I don't even want to repeat on the air. Firstly, I don't know whether anything in this article was true. I don't know whether your ex-wife was misquoted. But what I do know is that some people may have got a perception of you that isn't the case from this article. Firstly, how do you cope with such a extreme attack on your nature and the fact that you have no reply whatsoever?
Well, you have to tolerate it, don't you? Because it costs an awful lot of money to challenge it. But how they write it is they pay a lot of money for them articles. And so I was married for 24 years, and that girl had some hard time. We had hard times. We had 3 kids, 3 smashing kids. But I've been divorced for 18 years. Not 18 months, 18 years, and she puts a story in the paper every year. Now, that's fine. It doesn't bother me. I am used to it. But this time, I had a phone call on a Saturday morning from Caroline Ahern's brother, who said Caroline was boarding the plane for New York, and she'd seen this, and it had upset her, so she'd phoned him to ring me and just say she was thinking about me, which I thought was lovely. So I went and got the newspaper. When I read the article, I was appalled. Really, I mean, I don't know what the reason is, but obviously, apart from the fact that she's obviously getting paid a lot of money for these articles, but so be it.
Two things dawned on me when I read it. One, that it must crush you as a father and as a former husband, and secondly, the perception that some people may actually believe what is written.
Oh, yeah.
It's got to hurt you, and as you say, you really have no comeback whatsoever, do you?
I've got very little comeback, and what hurts it for me is it splits the loyalty of the kids. Because they obviously love their mum, and she's been good to them, by the way. I would never take that up. I was never afraid when I was in prison of anything happening to them kids, because she'd have been like a tigress. You know, she defended them with her life. But, I mean, how would you say to the kids, why is your mum writing this? Because they don't want to take sides. And that's quite right and proper. But it can't go on forever. I can't have this every year. When she's short of a few bob, I cannot have her putting these articles in the paper.
Okay, we'll leave that there, and thank you for talking to us about it. It's all in the book, and one thing that I do congratulate you on is your honesty in the book, and you say on many occasions, I have made mistakes, and, you know, I do regret them. But in life, you learn from them, and that's the thing that I can say you've certainly pointed out in this book, that you have learned from them, and you're really happy now with Rita. You got married, as you say, earlier on in the year, and congratulations for that. Very finally, let's talk about the Royle Family, because this is the thing that shot you into huge mega stardom. You'd already been in Brookside with Sue, and then you married her a second time to be in the Royle Family. Yeah. I mean, there's no point us even talking about this, because we can't do justice to how brilliant that programme is.
It was sensational, wasn't it? And it was just Caroline Ahern's idea. She knew exactly what she was doing. We made the first episode and she wasn't happy with it, and she had it scrapped, and she redone it the way she wanted to do it, and she wouldn't have an audience, and she wouldn't have canned laughter, and it was all brand new, and it's down to it. I mean, in reality, she has got genius IQ. I know that. She's got, I don't know, mental IQ, something like 174 or something. But she is a genius. But she's a genius as a human being. She's fabulous. I've never been treated so well, so kindly. She's generous in every way. I mean, she could keep the laughs in the show for herself. She doesn't. She gives them to me, or she gives them to Sue. But she's a brilliant writer, and I'm delighted that she's just writing a new series of Mrs. Merton. So as I say, that means she probably might lead on to doing the odd special of the Royle Family, which I would love to do, you know.
I feel so bad for her, because she's such a talent in terms of her writing and performance, that the demons inside of her seem to get the better of her so often, and it's such a shame that.
No, you see, you're believing what you've read in the paper. All this stuff about being a binge drinker and all like that's a load of nonsense. And what this report that's just come out, they've spent years trying to define what a binge drinker is, and they've said now anyone who has more than 4 pints is a binge drinker. Well, 75% of the population must be binge drinkers. I mean, sometimes I don't have a drink for 6 months, 7 months or whatever, but if I go out, I certainly have more than 4 pints, but I wouldn't class myself as a binge drinker. They've given her this title, which she doesn't deserve. She doesn't drink when she's working. She takes us out for the meal, we have a drink with the meal and stuff like that. But when she's working, I work with her for 6 weeks at a time, don't forget, she doesn't touch a drop.
And she's well, is she now? She's okay?
According to my brother Patrick, who's a lovely character, she's fabulous, yeah.
Fantastic. I'm really glad to hear that, and I'm so glad that she's working again, and that you hopefully will make another programme with her. Let's keep our fingers crossed. Ricky Tomlinson, we're out of time. It's been such a pleasure talking to you, and I thank you for your time, because I know you're really busy at the moment with this new book. It's called Ricky. If you want to read a really honest book about how to make a mistake and how to make it better, there is no better example than Ricky Tomlinson. I credit you so much for standing up for what you believe, and that's really what you get from this book, even if you go to prison for it. Stand up for what you believe.
I've tried. Cheers, kid. Thank you.
Thank you so much for spending the time with us. We're going to end with the piece of music from the Royle Family, which I just think is wonderful. It's called Half a World Away by Oasis. Thank you so much for spending the time with me today.